Welcome back to NatChat, the Untitled podcast. My name is Rob Thorne. Today, we have the first in our series discussing the return to the office, this time focusing on collaboration. With some countries now sharing their roadmap out of national lockdowns, more and more people and businesses are beginning to turn their attention to how we can build on the success of remote working and improve the way that we work moving forward. We talk about some real-life stories of how organisations are making a real effort to rethink the purpose of the office, and get advice from the leaders of AppSpace and Cisco on some things that you can consider as part of your return to the office strategy in this episode of the Untitled podcast. All right, it's Friday 19th of March, and wow, do we have a strong lineup for you today, listener. First of all, bright and early from the USA in Florida, we have Steve Terp from AppSpace. How are you doing, Steve?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having us today.
Good. And also with us, just as glamorous a location, Epsom, South London, we have James Leyland, also of AppSpace. Hey, James.
Hi, Rob. How you doing?
Yeah, good, man. The sun's shining in London today, so cannot complain. It's nearly the weekend. And then last but certainly not least, we have the triumphant return of Cisco collaboration overlord, Justin Woolen, to the Untitled podcast. Justin, good to have you back.
Hello, I'm an overlord, apparently. I love it.
It's not representative of how you run your teams, hopefully, but we'll leave that for another podcast.
No, it's not that, no.
No. Well, this is the first part in a series that we're going to be talking about the return to the office. So a conversation being had across the industry at the moment, and specifically today we're going to be focusing on collaboration. So before we get started, I'm going to go around the table and the virtual table, of course, and get a little bit more about our guests. So Steve, I'm going to start with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob. Steve Terp, I am in what's usually sunny Florida, but you got us beat today because it's cloudy and windy. I am the Chief Revenue Officer for AppSpace, and we're a global company that helps companies with workplace and team member experience. And so this is a near and dear subject to our heart, needless to say. So I look forward to chatting about it and seeing what people are doing out in the marketplace.
Yeah, definitely your time to shine. Really excited about AppSpace. And then James, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself as well? What keeps you busy day to day, my man?
Yep. So I'm James Leyland. I'm account executive / regional sales director for AppSpace in the UK. My role is working with new and existing customers to see how we can make their working lives more efficient. I've been with AppSpace now for about 5 months rather, but I've spent the last 10 years working in, feels like 5 years. No, it doesn't. It feels like 5 months. But I've spent the last 5
in a good way.
Yeah, no, it really has been great actually. But I spent that time, or the time before, also working in the software industry with a facilities focus. So I spent quite a bit of time understanding how clients in the worlds of facilities and real estate want to manage the future of the office.
Yeah, nice. Industry veterans all around today, listener. And Justin, you're well known, but in case it's anyone's first time, I'll steal your preferred way of asking. What's your name and where do you come from?
Hello, I'm Justin Woolen, and I come from a place called Bridgend in South Wales, and I have the privilege of being the collaboration leader for the UK and Ireland in Cisco. For those who do not know what collaboration is, I know it's a in the IT industry, it's basically anything to do with like telephony, calling, making phone calls, meetings, video meetings, online meetings, contact center, and video. We call video endpoints. It's a very industry term, but fancy, or as we say in Wales, fancy tallies.
Fancy tallies, yeah.
But don't quote me on that. But that's what we call collaboration inside Cisco.
Nice.
So.
No, I do sometimes get a bit carried away and assume that people know what collaboration means, but obviously that's very different depending on what industry you're in. So that's a good shout there. Fancy tallies as well. You might want to have a word with your marketing team, see what they think about that. Maybe get that on.
I think it's the Welsh thing because we're quite simple in Wales, and we just like, what is it? It's just a fancy telly. If I was trying to describe this to somebody else in a member of my family, I'd have to say fancy telly. They go, oh yeah, okay, I get it.
I'm a fancy.
Is it true, Justin, that in Welsh, I heard this morning, that the word microwave is something very amusing?
Yes, it is. Right, okay. For all our Welsh listeners, I'll apologise because I am not a native Welsh speaker. But it is pibbity pong. So, or pibbity pong, yeah, which is basically the noise it makes when it goes
I like
pong.
that a lot.
I think it's brilliant.
And they also, Welsh is a very ancient language, and we're moving off now. But it is we are.
It's all right. I'll bring us back eventually.
Yeah, you'll bring us back in. But it is, it's an ancient language, and but then there's no more. Every time a new modern word comes in, we just say it with a Welsh accent. So taxi is taxi, ambulance is ambulance. You just say it with a more of a Welsh accent. It's spelled slightly different, but there you go. But microwave is pibbly pong.
That's great.
Brilliant. I think that's brilliant.
I'll be using that before the end of today and have to explain that to my family. That's a good one.
Good. There you go. I'm adding value, and so is James by bringing this conversation into the conversation.
He can edit that out.
Yeah, you can edit
Microwaves.
that out.
yeah, maybe we'll see. Maybe. I think that might survive. Well, yeah, I suppose we better get into it then. So to kick off our discussion, gents, I'm going to start by referencing a piece of news circulating recently that caught my attention. And that was a statement from Goldman Sach CEO David Solomon, who said in an interview that remote working was, and I quote, "not a new normal, it's an aberration." And just to save listeners from having to Google what that word means, just like I did, that basically means differentiation from the norm. And he went on to say that we're going to correct as soon as possible, which I found really interesting. So I wanted to go around the table and ask, with this in mind, before the pandemic, what was your split between the office and home, and what do you expect it to look like in 12 months' time? And I say that about you specifically, having worked for organisations that probably supported this type of work before. So, Justin, why don't I come to you first?
Oh, right, okay. So what was it like beforehand? And we've just moved, my anniversary for lockdown was the 9th of March when I did my last meeting in an office.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, it doesn't feel great, does it? But literally, I had to keep looking in my diary to go back a year to see where it was, because it felt like a massive landmark. But we've done a year, we survived a year, we're all here, we're all safe, which is a great thing. Before lockdown, generally, I would say, and this is the reason why I joined Cisco 14 years ago, was about that, what we call flexible working. So I would be home, worst days to travel, Mondays and Fridays. I don't know if that's the same in Florida, Steve, or James, where you fancy West London. They're difficult days to travel because everyone's on the road. So, but we were born, and Cisco was born out of flexible working. I've never been 9 to 5. I've never been 5 days a week in an office. I live 157 miles away from my head office. So I would go in when I needed to go in, and when I went in, I was productive. I made sure I have a day full of meetings. So that was pretty much what I was like beforehand. There were weeks that I would be. The interesting thing I did observe that if I did 3 days on the bounce working from home, I would usually say, "I'll get a bit of cabin fever." And you go, right, I need to go out. And then you would literally just jump in the car and go, right, I'm going to go and work from the office just for a day to say I've got out of the house. But that now is the new norm. But it's this, we were just flexible. And we talk about hybrid working now. At the end of the day, it is flexible working and working where you want. And work is what you do, not where you go and that sort of thing. But it's,
that's changed then, potentially for you, it sounds like. Probably.
No, I think the one thing I got better at, honestly, was managing my days at home, where I will go. I like structure and I like routine, but I would always make sure that I do some exercise in the morning. I take a break at lunchtime. I take the dog for a walk. I get out of the house, and then at the end of the day, I make sure I finish at a civilized time. Because beforehand, those 2 days that we would commonly work from home, and especially on a Friday, you'd smash it. You'd be on back-to-back calls, no breaks, all the way through the day, because you just knew, right, it's the end of the week, I'll get it done and I'll be finished. Now you've got to do it in a sustainable way. That I've got to be able to go, I've got to get up tomorrow and do this. I've got to get up tomorrow and do it again. So you've got to look at, I've just brought more self-care, I would say, into it. And Cisco being a great company, and a very autonomous in how you run your time, that was the thing that allowed me to do it. So as long as I was still delivering the things I needed to deliver to the business and looking after my team, then how I did it was down to me. So I just brought in a lot more self-care and making sure that I wasn't going mad.
Definitely necessary. How does that contrast to how you do things on the East Coast of America, Steve?
Sure. Yeah. So I had a really unique scenario because I literally started on the 9th of March with AppSpace. And so from an AppSpace perspective, I started on the 9th. I flew back to Florida, not knowing exactly what was going to happen. And then all hell broke loose the Thursday that I flew back. And it's never been the same since then. And so from a perspective of talk about unique timing, I've got dozens and dozens of people in our sales, marketing, and partner organizations, of which I've met about 10 of them face to face over the course of the last year. So very unusual, but that's how it is, right? And so I think our company adjusted really well. We're very global, so big group in Asia, big groups in Europe, big groups in the US, 2 parts in the US. We had just done an acquisition. So I do think from a work perspective, AppSpace was already super flexible. Go where you need to go, do what you need to do. The culture was very, adapt your job to make sure it works for your life. I think the missing part of it is the community, the gatherings, right? So even then, even though we might have had people spread out, there were times when you got together to go to a big show, or you got together to go on customer calls. And so I think it's that gathering part that's probably missing. And I was with a company for almost 20 years that was acquired by DXC Corporation in 2017. And we were, same thing, very similar to what Justin talked about, very flexible. You want to work from home? Great. Depending on what your role is, you don't have to come near an office if you don't want to, or we want you there part-time. But we were so purposeful about getting people together annually and getting people together socially that we found that right balance there. So that's kind of what it looks like for AppSpace and for me prior to joining AppSpace a year ago.
Yeah, and I'll come to you next, James. But the interesting that you say that. I mean, that is for me the thing that I miss most. I mean, I think it's quite unanimously accepted that the office is maybe a bad place to get work done, but it's a good place to work together with people and to collaborate, right? I mean, personally, I had the nice balance of, 2 days working from home, maybe 3 days in the office, something like that, depending on what was necessary, to smash out some documentation, things like that. Obviously, you don't want to be surrounded by people asking you to go for coffee or to go and grab lunch and things like that back then.
Well, that's we have about 10 people here in Florida. And Florida's pretty liberal and open with regards to the rules. So every Tuesday we do get together carefully and go to eat lunch, most of the time outside. And I just cherish Tuesdays. Like I wake up Tuesday morning, I'm going to go hang out with my coworkers today. We're going to get to talk about our families and business and everything else under the sun. So I think everybody will be joyful as some of those things return.
Yeah, I agree. I'm jealous of you there as well. I'm definitely going to be one of those as our lockdown restrictions begin to relax over the next 3 months or so. I'm definitely going to be one of the people that's going to be safely going back into our offices, I think. So, James, how about you, my man? What's your split? Because obviously you're only just outside of the city. So,
I was thinking about this morning. I've not had a dedicated desk for 20 years. Now I know you're going to look at me and think you're not that old, but I am. And my job has always been client facing. So that has meant it's going to client offices. And I would only ever go to an office or our head office of whichever firm I work for if I had to meet with someone for a business purpose. There was never, I've not had for 20 years the 9 to 5 commute, which I've relished not doing because when I did do it, I hated it. There's nothing enjoyable about there's nothing enjoyable about that. So how's my life changed since? Well, obviously I'm doing all my meetings now online, and that's fine. I did a lot of online meetings beforehand. There is a lot less traveling because of obviously lockdowns, but post-pandemic, I do believe I will be going back to a mix of both, where I'll have clients that still want to meet online, but those will still want to meet face-to-face. One of the nice things about joining AppSpace when I did, or actually the organization that I joined, is AppSpace, by nature of what they do with helping companies communicate, is my onboarding could have been an absolute disaster in October of last year because I haven't met my boss, Steve. he's on the other side of of an ocean. I've not met my colleagues face to face, apart from 2 of them for a coffee when we were allowed to. But actually, because I'm now being inundated all the time through the technology we have, I've been kept constantly up to date about what's going on within the business. Whereas I think, gosh, if that hadn't happened, I'd probably be sat at home now going, I don't know what they want me to do. But they're very, very good, funnily enough, because it's the industry they work in, at making sure people know what's going on within the business and where we're taking the product. So that's been one real interesting learning for me. But I do think, like everyone else, being able to meet people at some point is going to be great. I don't think I'll be going back to the office for the sake of it. I'll be going to meet when it is time to get together. I do think, again, one of the interesting things about this was, if we take people coming out of education now, they're going to be coming to the office because they want to, because they need to train. And that's, I think, the Goldman Sachs chap. I mean, look, he's an investment banker. They're a very different industry, for people coming out of education. But for the vast majority of us, let's think about it. When we come out of education, we do want to go to an office because we want to learn. We also want to socialize. 1 in 3 of us meet our partner. I met my wife at my first company. I wouldn't have met her if I stayed completely remote. So I do think we will still have that, and that would be great because people do need to get married. But the nice thing is that we don't want to have the 9 to 5 anymore. So I don't think my job's going to change massively post-pandemic.
And I chose that example from Mr. Solomon specifically because it is probably the most extreme example that I've found, certainly from speaking to our salespeople and having a couple of conversations with clients as well. I've not actually found anyone that's that extreme in terms of the direction that they're going. But how are those conversations going for you gents at the moment in terms of the kind of, have you actually seen anyone that's gone that kind of, yes, absolutely, we're going to straight away, June 21st as the, I think the first date that potentially people are going to be able to move back into the office. Have you actually found anyone that's that, regimented and you're all going to be back into the office when you get back?
I've bumped into I bumped into a customer again. It seems to be, it's another financial services customer, but we're dealing with them. They moved on to WebEx during the start of the pandemic, and they're smashing it. They're using it loads, but we're coming up for a renewal, and we're just saying to them, look, okay, you ready to? And they go, no, we are moving back. We are coming off this. We're going back to the office. And in my head, I'm going, it's a bit of a HR thing, because you can't make people, because they just go, look, it's down to the individual. If you don't feel safe, you can't, because it's not just about my office. They're in London. I've got to get on the tube. I've got to get on a train. I've got to, and you've got to ease people back in. You can't, and that's the thing I'm sort of observing. And that's what the Goldman Sachs thing for me is. And there's other, it feels very extreme. And I know we can talk about, and I've got an opinion about this from an education point of view, but it just feels that the answer is either one or the other. And because I don't think the world, and I'll be very open, I don't think the majority of the world have worked out how to do this sustainably, in the way of you can do it all the time, you can dip into it, you can dip out of it, of flexible working. They've just gone, right, we've gone from in the office to home, and they haven't worked out what's the in-between for them. And the in-between is not about the company, it's about for the individual. And that's the piece for me about where I think it's just through a lack of understanding, and the old way is always the right way. And actually it's not. And if you look at innovation, you look at all the things that happen in the world, it all starts off with change. And I just think the answer isn't all at home. Believe me, I'm not a fan of staying home all day, every day. But there is a bit of in between. There's a lot of in between in there.
Couldn't agree more. I speak to clients obviously all the time, and I've not had one single client who's turned around and said, we're opening up the office when we're allowed to, and everyone is being asked to come back. The most aggressive I've seen realistically is people saying, at the end of a lockdown or as soon as it was allowed, people were opening up offices for those that needed to come back. But the change has been drastic, because companies, without exception that we work with, have said, we're going to open up the office for those that want to come back when they're ready to come back, with a view to them, their own business and their own unit making that decision of how they want to work moving forward. And they're doing it because they can see the benefits of productivity with remote working. They can see that, yes, we got certain benefits of coming to the office, but we don't get those benefits if we come in the office 5 days a week. So we've seen leadership teams across industries at AppSpace turn around and say, we're going to cut real estate. We don't know exactly how much we're going to cut it by yet, but we're definitely going to do it. And I think, I was listening to something recently that said, 50% of all firms, have said, of enterprises have said they are going to cut real estate at some point. I think the figure's going to be a lot higher based on conversations I've had, but it is going to be a hybrid working. The office becomes collaboration zones, but the days of outside of Goldman Sachs, the office layouts of row upon row upon row of desks for doing administration, I think are long gone. And even potentially in Goldman Sachs, while it's okay to ask a graduate trainee to come to the office, work 100-hour days, I don't think you can do that to someone who's been in the business 20 years, works in the back office and accounting. I think those people are going to say, if I want to stay here, I'm going to come back in a hybrid role. So that groundswell for me, having the conversations that we're having, is not going to turn around anytime soon.
Yeah, the interesting thing is this isn't just a pandemic thing. These changes were happening prior, right? So this is a cultural shift that we're going through. And what this quote reminds me of, if you Google it and go back a little bit, is I think it was Marissa Mayer from Yahoo that said, everybody's going to be in an office. This didn't work, and everybody's coming back to the office. And I'm not sure how much longer she was there, but this was, I don't know, a decade ago or thereabouts. So I think this changing and shifting workplace, and Justin probably knows it better than anybody because Cisco's been such a big driver around how do you keep people connected during it, was happening before. So what we did when I came on board is, in order to really understand what the customers do, we did about 25 workshops, mostly with big companies we work with or already or are talking to probably half the global, Fortune 500. And what we found was everybody thought it would be different, but nobody knows exactly what that different was going to look like. And so it's fascinating for us to kind of watch this kind of play out. And the other thing that was really unique, and James probably saw this, going back and being in the industry for a long period of time, was all of a sudden, all these people at companies are dealing with an unknown and having to work with a lot of different people that they never had to work with before and trying to figure this out. So it's facilities and legal and employee communication and everybody more than ever having to come together and go figure that out. And that's not an easy thing. The closest thing I can compare it to is Y2K. Like there are, and that ages me, I know, but that absolutely was a big unknown for everybody. They didn't know what was going to happen. So in fact, I have a son that's in law school here in the US, and their professors have told them, you're going to graduate and 90% of you guys are going to be locked up working on COVID-related lawsuits for the first 5 years you get out of law school. So that kind of risk has to enter into the play with what these companies are doing. So to James's point, we keep talking to customers. They're trying to figure it out. I think the biggest, for lack of a better term, bomb that we had dropped, last week we kicked off a project. We extended our platform, listening to these customers to help people return to the office. And last week we kicked off a project where one of those customers said, we want to bring 75,000 people back by summer. And so that's a major undertaking. 75,000 people globally need to come back into the office. However, it's not everybody. It's just a portion of their workforce, which is probably over 200,000. So it's a large company that everybody would recognize. So pretty fascinating to watch how different it is for everybody. Everybody does think it's going to change, as we said before. They don't know exactly what that means yet.
Yeah, and from some of the conversations that we're having, certainly it feels like there are some common outcomes that clients are working towards when it comes to, I think the desire are, A, safe spaces, pretty straightforward, right? We want to make sure that when we go back, everyone's safe, and B, make sure the experience is consistent with what they've become accustomed to for the last 12 months. But as part of that transition back, I imagine you guys are probably having conversations with IT leaders that might have found themselves with, I don't know, some new responsibility, or perhaps some more autonomy to be able to shape their infrastructure around the new way of working. So from a thought leadership perspective, I think a lot of the listeners who are our clients will be wanting to know, what's your advice to those people that are trying to make those decisions at the moment? What do you think should be front of mind? And what are you saying as part of those conversations? Justin, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And from a technology perspective, it's the bit of going, there is a bit of in between. And the one stat that we're all good at talking stats, but I think 98% of meetings are going to happen with somebody's going to be remote. Now, pre-pandemic, if you were the one person on a WebEx when everybody else in the room, you would be disengaged, not heard. You'd be I'm trying to think of some of them, but you just wouldn't be. Wouldn't feel part of it. You were the spare. You were the.
You're right.
Third wheel at that meeting, and the problem is that's going to become the norm. You are going to have a meeting with somebody in the room, and then people remote. But you've got to be as productive and engaged as if you were in the room. So getting people, whether they're in IT or whether and we seem to be having more discussions around HR. This seems to be more HR led from our perspective, from inside Cisco. It's a HR thing. Of you've got to think about your spaces. You've got to think about the kinds of meetings you're going to have, and you've got to use the tools. And it's not like, it's like if you give everyone a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's about going, right, you've got collaboration technology, wherever you get it from, but you've got to make sure it works in a way that you're as engaging to somebody who's sat at home with people in the room. You're not going to have it, because a meeting room of 20 people is maybe going to seat 5. Our team meetings, I don't think I'll ever have a team meeting with everybody in the room at the same time, because it just physically, they won't, I'll have to have a marquee or something like that. So they've got to think about hybrid working and bringing people in. And I know the guys for Steve and James will talk about that, how the technology all works in, but it's how does the technology help as well? So counting people. The video units that we have, or as I say, fancy tallies, but they're also sensors, because it's got a camera and it can count the people in the room. It can measure how far apart you are. We're bringing more innovation to it, so it'll be able to sort of work out what the size of the room is and going, right, actually, Steve and Justin, you need to move further apart because you're too close. Or actually, James walks in the room and goes, right, there's too many people in the room now. And the ability to use the technology for which we've been doing for a while, like touchless meetings, walking into the room, it just detects that you're there by pulling the profile off your mobile phone and going, right, Justin's in the room. These are the meetings you've got coming up. Do you want me to start the meeting? Yes, please. So let's take the technology and drive it to what it's able to do, not what you think it should do. And I think that's sort of where I'm going with this.
Yeah, get the technology to work for you. James, I can see you've got I've got something to say face on.
No, that's the normal. I've got no idea face. Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, the thing that I think that always amused me when I saw people, a lot of offices refurbished, is the thing that has to be focused on is that often always was no training needed.
Mm.
That people should not have to, when faced with a new way of working, a new technology, anything new, frankly, sitting them down and then saying, right, here's the training of how to use this, automatically defeats the point. And we see it now with technologies that we have, that we can give companies a standardized approach, heavily automated approach, where a user just walks in and it starts. But one of the things that shocked me was you would walk into an organization and they would have a brand new, amazing piece of kit in a meeting room that obviously was very expensive, had all the bells and whistles, and then there was a laminate piece of paper on how to use it. And you know where that's going. That's going in the side corner, and then what happens is people went to have the face-to-face meeting. And as Justin was saying, the person on the WebEx now or whatever will be just as important and need to be just as part of that meeting. So it has to be that I walk into that meeting room, or I walk into my office and I touch down and I get that consistent standardized approach that I am used to, or I just press the button, or the meeting is already waiting for me. One button push to start is the maximum that anyone should get when they want to use technology in an office, but no training needed. That's the key thing for me.
And it's interesting because that puts the pressure on technology companies like Cisco and like AppSpace, but it also puts the technology on those IT people. And it's funny, one of the things we heard lots of stories from customers about how they had to make the transition out of the office. Like these poor IT guys, like they were around the clock making sure they were set up and people were set up right at home and what have you. And they had to move really, really fast. Well, now as people make those back to office decisions, and how many people and where and when, the IT people are doing the same thing. I've never seen IT people move so fast to try to get caught up. We've got dozens of companies on our platform, and it's amazing to watch how agile they've had to be to adjust to the unknowns of what's coming up for them. It's neat to watch, and at the same time, there's a lot of pressure on people that we all need to go help make sure they're successful.
And I think to that point of the needs training, and I think that's the bit of the challenges, is that everyone's gone home and they're just using the technology to the most probably the worst way it was ever designed to be used. And maybe that sounds a bit counterintuitive for somebody from Cisco, but it's the bit of going, you've got to have that balance of everything can't be at home or everything can't be in the office. And that's the thing, though. And you just think, not everybody, but people are going this mind, like Goldman Sachs, is that I can't do this all the time because this is the only way of doing it. If working from home means sitting on a web conference all day, and it's not. It's there's loads of bits in between, but it just feels that they go, oh, web conference. The answer is always just web conferencing or WebEx. I like to say be WebEx, and I'm sure they're using other types as well. But that's the thing, though, where we were trained just through natural usage and using it. We knew how to have good meetings. We knew how to use the technology because we did it every day. So when we went home, it wasn't just about that panic of, I've got a guy in the street who went to the local electronics store with a trolley and a credit card buying laptops. They were just making these decisions overnight, and they weren't great decisions. They were like, and then in the end, because they've got a contact center, all the contact center workers had to come back in because they couldn't get into work. So it's a real plethora of challenges because people weren't culturally used to using it. So they just went. So like Goldman Sachs fella is like, well, there's either two ways of working now: sitting on a web conference all day, or coming into the office. And they've got to work out and be educated on. There's lots of stuff in between.
Yeah, and I saw Leyland came out with their annual state of work report 2 days ago, and if we look at the hybrid workplace being the split between home and being the office, is actually people will go back to the office or want to go back to the office more if it's a good office. Now, the difference was huge. People who will work remotely will want to work remotely if it's a poor office. And the biggest difference between a good office and a poor office, the top 3 reasons, and I'll read them out actually.
I like this.
Were the top 3 reasons, thank you, were variety of different types of workspace, informal work areas / breakout areas, atriums and communal areas. It wasn't fresh air quality, or the comfortness of my chair. It was all about the collaboration space that I'm given.
Wow.
And at home, same question needs to be asked. What makes a good home working environment against a poor home working environment? And we will see businesses make that investment into, okay, Cisco, I'm going to give you a name drop here, your Desk Pros and that sort of thing, so that they get a better collaborative experience. And that investment will need to be made both ends for companies if they're going to make that saving on real estate.
And that's an interesting point, because that's a really interesting point, James, because look, people have invested money, their own hard-earned money, in their workspaces at home. We all have. We all have. We have all, kids have lost bedrooms and get stuck in with their siblings because they needed to convert one of the bedrooms into a workspace.
Yeah.
Partition walls are going up, things like the other. We're buying, I've gone and put lovely pictures up. I know nobody can see this. It's great for a podcast, waving your arms at pictures they can't see. But you want to make it a place that I can sit in and enjoy it. I've bought a desk thing that lifts up and down so I can stand up. And the thing is, though, the people have done this and paid for it out of their own money to make their home working environment better for them. But then what are the organizations that they work for done? How are they investing in them working out? It isn't just, here's a laptop and you've got access to Cisco WebEx. That's not the answer. That's not the investment. That's not investing in your people. You're just giving them some technology. It's the bit of going, right, how do they work? Have they got the right tools? And I'm being maybe a bit melodramatic here, but it's giving somebody a laptop is a mobile computer. Yes, got it. Is it a video conference device? No, because that's why people like Goldman Sachs and even I think it was the CEO of Nationwide was when it was on did an article about where they give them his workers 11:30 till 1 of no video conference time. It's because it's not the right tool for the right job. If I'm going to sit there and want to be in an immersive and want to be in a video meeting, I can do it all day. Give them the right tools, give them the right units that fits their space at home. Maybe a laptop is the right thing for some people, but you see people in that article. There are people who've got in that picture were stacking up books, laptop on top of it to get the camera at the right height, so they're not sat there hunched over it. My wife, who sits, and we call her, she likes to call herself Harry Potter because she's got a little desk space under the stairs.
Yeah, I've seen plenty of those.
And she's not in a cupboard under the stairs. There's no door, all right.
Disclaimer.
But disclaimer: I'm not locking my wife in a cupboard under the stairs. Not yet, anyway. But but that's where she works. But she's got the. But the thing is, though, I've given her a Cisco headset, even though she's on another platform, Microsoft. But I gave her a headset, so at least she could have a better user experience. I want to give her a WebEx camera, but she's gone back to work now. But that's what they're doing. People are having to try and get it. I'm trying to make a laptop work as a video conference unit. And go, do you know, if you're on this thing all day, give them the right tools. I'm not saying we should go out and spend millions and billions, but there'll be enough people out there you just go, right, let's get them the right tools for the right job.
Yeah, Rob, I think Justin brings about a good point. Is at the end of the day, it's still people working, right? And so I live exactly what he's talking about. I have a Desk Pro at the office. I'm happen to be home today, which I'm usually at the office here in Tampa. And I have a Desk Pro, and it's a brilliant experience. And I come home, and it's a very different experience. So I'm thankful that I have that option. But when we talk about people, even with this global pandemic, competing for talent today is as insane as it's ever been. It's still that hard to find great people and to keep great people. And people are going to vote with their employment. So people like Goldman are going to vote with their employment, whether they work there, whether they stay there or not. And so to not create policies and safety and comfort and all the other things around people is really a kind of a vote to some degree to potentially lose that war on talent. And God knows everybody needs more people and better people to fit into their culture. So it'll be fascinating to watch that. I have a friend who was in the financial business in New York City. They decided they did not want to be in New York City. He wanted to work for a different financial company. And he said, great, I'll come work for you, but only if I can move to Florida. And they said, great, move to Florida. We don't care where you are. So that's the kind of example of what the new world will look like from a people perspective, which is at the end of the day, what makes companies run.
That's an interesting, because you started this job, Steve, on the day of lockdown on the 9th of March. I've moved job in lockdown, and I have got a team of 30 people, and I've not met most of them because we started off with a team of 20. We've grown. I've hired 10 people. I've not met them. I have not met them. But because I'm using this technology, I'm having more of an immersive experience. I've not even met you, Rob. I don't even know who you look like. Everyone on this podcast, I have never physically met, but I've been speaking to you for quite a long time now. And me and James have met for the first time.
One day, Justin.
Yeah, one day. But we've met for the first time. And now my team are working with his team, and we're doing business together.
It's awesome.
hopefully.
Mm.
Is that right, James? Are we doing all right?
We're doing okay.
Oh,
We're doing okay. You could be better, but we'll come on to that another time. That's another podcast.
All right, okay. That's another job.
James
that's
is-
another.
James is just thinking about that big move to Florida, right?
Yeah, but I mean, look, I mean, the one of the challenges though that we have had customers coming out, and I think there's a great stat about this recently, which escapes me, but is there is a challenge with hybrid working or people working remotely outside over and above the communications or the effectiveness of the hardware that you have at home, and that's communication, keeping the company culture when you're remote. And I think the Goldman chap again was referencing how he wants his culture, and the way he's used to controlling his culture is by having his staff in front of him. But if I'm going to have, to Steve's point about his colleague who now works remotely from Florida, how can that business make sure that they're still giving the culture and the communication that person would have got in the office? Because otherwise, we will see what happened exactly with Yahoo, which was people were working, taking a wage there, and they're just becoming less and less productive, starting not to answer back to bosses. People who eventually didn't know if they were employed there or not, they were taking a wage, and that's generated the demand for Marion, I think it was, to bring them all back to the offices. So that's going to be a really big long-term challenge for these businesses to make sure that they still have the tools, or using the WebEx or the Slacks or whatever of this world, to make sure that communications is as high a priority as it was pre-pandemic.
Yeah, and that's at the heart of the conversations that we're certainly having at the moment. I mean, it's mostly, again, the planning stage it feels like we're at the moment in terms of, readiness, optimization, working with our clients for consultations, and just trying to plant ideas in their heads to start thinking, so that they can go to those HR teams and, COOs, CEOs, and then try and help them decide what the new way of working is. And I think there's been tons of ideas from you gents already, so thank you very much for your time. Wanted to close out by just having a quick conversation about what's coming up for you guys. I know AppSpace, you've got your client summit coming up in a few months' time. I don't know if you're willing to share any sneak peeks or preview anything that people might be able to look forward to coming up there, but this is your time to talk about it if you'd like.
Sure, I'll take a quick shot, and then James can add on to it. As I mentioned before, we have historically been working with lots of size companies, and it's all about communication and workplace experience. And that really pivot for us, what we learned from all those workshops was, let's help people get back to the office. So that's been a gigantic subject for that. So companies that are looking to do that, we've got a great way for them to be able to try that and check out the technology that we have to help them do that. The other big piece for us has been what's happening with mobile, and making sure that you can connect with those frontline workers, because those people that are never in the office, and maybe they're not even checking into a depot or a warehouse or anything else like that. And so those are the two big trends that we're seeing here. Is we want to be able to have one great platform to communicate with everybody, regardless of where they are or how they're working. And so that's really going to be the theme of what we'll talk to our customers about coming up in May when we get them together on a virtual summit. So we're really excited about doing it.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that one, it's using AppSpace to drive employee engagement is the bit that I'm most excited about over the coming months, and looking at what we're developing there. We already have the ability for engagement, communication, culture to be driven through existing messaging platforms or hardware that companies might have, but looks like we're going to take that to the next level, as Steve was saying, around mobile. But with a focus on employee and workforce engagement. So that's the bit I'm excited about.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And Justin, I know typically this time of year would be Cisco Live time. I know last year, the last one, at least I can remember, was Barcelona. Yeah. I think this one was supposed to be in Amsterdam, right? So I'm sure there's still tons of good stuff to come out of it. But what can we look forward to?
I can't say because it's Cisco Live and I'm on embargo. Yeah, sure. I can't talk about it. But what I will say is that the things that I'm looking, we're going to see further innovation, further announcements. We in the last few months we brought out 400 new features into WebEx, and it's not
hard to keep up.
It is hard to keep up, and at the heart of it is about inclusivity and connecting people. And the one thing about this pandemic and the future of work and whatever you want to call it, hybrid work, and we're doing a lot of work within my team and Cisco to educate people. We really want to share what we've been doing and what we're doing as a company. And what's our HR strategy? What's our estate strategy? What's our technology strategy? Because we've been doing this for years. So I'm really looking forward to sharing all that. You're going to see more innovation coming out in Cisco Live. So please tune in for that and go and watch it. But it is that thing about how do you really, really work and include people who are remote. And it's not just about the remote people. It's the people who are remote who maybe don't want to shout out and you mean talk over people who aren't like me, who are too overly chatty. It's how do you bring the introverts, the people who are quiet, the people who have got the great ideas but don't shout out about them. How do you make them, give them a voice and a platform for them to feel like they're included, and then the business gets the best out of them and gets the best out of everybody. And that's where the features come in. That's where you look at, Slido, which we're in the process of acquiring. You look at how our customers can engage with their customers through platforms such as IMI Mobile. So they've all been announced now, but you're going to see even more stuff coming out in that space. But it's all about future of work, hybrid work, and then educating. That's what my team are really good at, is educating our customers and what the future can look like with our partners such as AppSpace, because it's an overall solution. We don't make everything, but with partners like AppSpace, where you can have and I'm going to say the J word, is journey of from home to the office and back again, that it's safe, secure, and you are productive.
Yeah, that's it's probably a good moment to leave it on. I know, just in terms of things to point people in the direction of, we're going to be running our return to office campaign over the next few months as well. So listeners, you can keep an eye out on that. We're going to be running a managed proof of value or trial of AppSpace alongside Natilic as well, just making sure that, again, any clients that want to take a look at that can do, and there'll be a link to where you can sign up for that in the show notes description. So keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, gents, I think all that's left to do is thank you for your time. So James, Justin, Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks for having us.
Most welcome.
Thanks for listening to NatChat, the Natilic podcast. Please subscribe to the Natilic podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. And leave us a review while you're there. It really helps us improve and grow the show. Please note that opinions expressed on the Natilic podcast are those of the hosts or our guests, not the organisations that they represent. You can find more information on Natilic on our website, that's natilic.com. You can also find us on social media. On Twitter, we're at Natilic Group, as well as Facebook and LinkedIn. Our theme music was provided by Dan Short, who you can find at Danzer, that's DANZR, on music streaming services. This is Rob Thor, and thanks again for listening.